The tow truck's flashing amber lights painted streaks across the polished windows of the upscale restaurant. I sat in my old pickup truck across the street, the engine off, just watching. On my phone, my son Kevin's voice was a tinny, panicked shriek. "Dad, what is this? What's happening? They're hooking up my car. You have to stop them." I took a slow sip of the lukewarm coffee in my thermos, the sound of the winch motor straining as it pulled his brand new six-figure sports car onto the flatbed. It was the same car he'd bought with the loan I co-signed, the loan he defaulted on after one payment, the loan that was now, according to him, my problem. "I can't stop them, Kevin," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. "The bank wants its money." "Money? What money? You're supposed to be handling it. You co-signed. Mum said you'd take care of it," he screamed, his voice cracking with the entitlement I'd spent a lifetime funding. His mother, my wife, had always been his greatest enabler, convincing me that Kevin's happiness was the only thing that mattered. For years I believed her. I believed that being a good father meant being a blank check, an endless source of support with no questions asked. I was the family workhorse, the reliable machine that produced the money so they could live the life they felt they deserved. He didn't know that the tow truck was just the beginning. I wasn't just taking back the car, I was taking back my entire life, piece by painful piece. This act wasn't born from anger, not anymore. The anger had burned out weeks ago, leaving behind something cold, hard, and clear. This was about justice. This was the first move in a game he and his mother had started, not realizing I was the one who knew all the rules. He thought he'd left me with a mountain of debt and a ruined credit score. He thought he'd broken me. What he didn't understand was that he'd finally set me free. You're probably wondering what kind of father does this to his own son, in public no less. To understand that, you need to understand the son who looked me in the eye, smirked, and told me that my financial ruin was just his early inheritance. It all began 6 months ago, not with a tow truck, but at my own dining room table. It was my birthday, though you wouldn't know it. The conversation, as always, orbited around Kevin. My wife, Sharon, guided it with the practiced skill of a master puppeteer. She had this way of making Kevin's most outlandish demands sound like reasonable, once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that only a fool or a bad father would pass up. This time the opportunity was a $250,000 business loan. Kevin, who had never held a job for more than a few months, had a revolutionary idea for an AI-driven lifestyle brand. He slid a glossy brochure across the table. It was full of stock photos of smiling millennials in yachts and buzzwords like synergy, monetization, and disruption. There wasn't a single concrete number or a coherent plan in the entire document. I saw it for what it was immediately, a fantasy, a $250,000 ticket to play pretend as a CEO. I started to ask the hard questions. What's your business model? Who are your suppliers? Where's the 5-year projection? Each question was met with a dismissive wave from Kevin and a disappointed sigh from Sharon. "Frank, don't be so negative," she'd said, her voice dripping with practiced condescension. "You have to believe in your son. This is his dream." It was always about dreams and feelings, never about logic or responsibility. For 25 years, my role was to fund their dreams while burying my own. I was the foundation of the house, buried underground. Essential but unseen, while they were the fancy furniture on display. When I hesitated, Sharon played her trump card. She placed her hand over mine, her touch feeling less like affection and more like a shackle. "Think of it as an investment in his future," she said softly. "It's what a good father would do. It's just your signature. We know you have the credit for it." That was the core of it. My perfect credit score, earned through decades of frugal living, careful planning, and working overtime, wasn't a testament to my discipline. To them, it was just another resource to be tapped. I was tired of being the bad guy, the naysayer, the roadblock to their happiness. So, against every instinct screaming inside me, I agreed. The moment the word yes left my mouth, my birthday was forgotten. They didn't see me anymore. They were too busy celebrating their victory, already planning how to spend the money. I just sat there, feeling the cold dread of knowing I had just signed my own death warrant. The money hit Kevin's account less than a week later. The first purchase wasn't for web hosting, software, or inventory. It was the down payment on the six-figure sports car I just had towed away. Then came the designer clothes, the $1,000 dinners he'd post on social media, and a business trip to Miami that looked suspiciously like a week-long party. Whenever I'd gently ask about the business, about when I could see a website or a product, Sharon would run interference. "You have to give him space to be creative, Frank," she'd say. "Stop micromanaging him. You're just going to stifle his genius. My money, my credit, my risk." But I was allowed no oversight. I was the silent partner whose only job was to pay the bills and keep my mouth shut. The first notice from the bank arrived 35 days after the loan was funded. Payment overdue. My heart sank. It had to be a mistake. I called Kevin immediately. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice lazy and annoyed, with loud music thumping in the background. "What's up? I'm kind of busy," he slurred. I could practically smell the overpriced cocktail through the phone. "The loan payment, Kevin, it's past due. The bank sent a letter." There was a pause, then a sigh of pure exasperation, as if I'd asked him to solve a complex physics equation. "Oh, that. Yeah, I've been meaning to get to it. Things are just crazy right now, setting everything up." "Setting what up?" I asked, my voice getting tighter. "The bank is going to start calling me, son. This affects my credit. We had a deal." And that's when he said it, the words that shattered the last remaining fragment of my naivete. He didn't shout, he just said it, with a chillingly casual tone, like he was telling me the time. "Look, the deal was you'd help me get the capital. You did. I have the money and I'm building my brand. You co-signed the loan, which means you accepted the risk, so the monthly payments, that's your problem now." He hung up before I could even respond. I stood there in my kitchen, holding a piece of paper that represented $250,000 of debt, and all I could hear was the dial tone. For the first time, I understood. This wasn't a business plan, it was a heist. And I wasn't his father, I was the mark. For a week, I lived in a fog of disbelief. The calls from the bank became a daily ritual of shame and anxiety. Each ring of the phone felt like a hammer blow to my chest. They used words like delinquency, liability, and legal action, words I had spent my entire life working to avoid. All my discipline, all my sacrifices were being erased by a son who felt entitled to my ruin and a wife who saw nothing wrong with it. That was the part that truly broke me. I confronted Sharon that weekend. I found her in the living room, scrolling through vacation packages to Europe on her tablet. I calmly laid the second overdue notice on the coffee table in front of her. "Kevin told me the loan is my problem now," I said, my voice hollow. "He's not going to pay. They're threatening to seize our assets." I watched her face, hoping for a flicker of shock, of solidarity, of loyalty. I saw nothing. She didn't even look up from her screen. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Frank," she sighed. "He's just trying to get his feet under him. He's under a lot of pressure. You need to be supportive." "Supportive," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Sharon, this is our home, my retirement. Everything I've worked for is on the line." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were cold. "It's just money. You can always make more. What you can't do is crush your son's spirit. He deserves this chance. We deserve to see him succeed. Honestly, I think you're just jealous that he's not afraid to take risks and live a little." That was it. That was the moment the fog cleared and was replaced by a terrible, chilling clarity. It wasn't just that they didn't appreciate me, it was that they held me in contempt. My prudence was weakness. My hard work was a resource to be plundered. I wasn't a husband or a father, I was a utility, I didn't argue, I didn't yell, I just nodded slowly. "I understand," I said, and I did. I walked out of the room, went to my office, and shut the door. I pulled out the old Rolodex I'd had for 30 years and found the number for David Abernathy, the lawyer who had handled my father's will. He was a sharp, old-school attorney who valued loyalty and integrity above all else. "Mr. Abernathy," I said when he answered, "it's Frank. We need to talk about an agreement I co-signed for my son, and I have a feeling I'm going to need the best fraud litigator you have." David Abernathy's office was like a fortress of quiet dignity. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, and the air smelled of old paper and polish. He was a man in his late 60s, with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. He had known my father, and by extension, he had known the values I was raised with: honesty, hard work, and your word being your bond. I laid everything out on his vast mahogany desk: the joke of a business plan, the co-signed loan agreement, copies of Kevin's social media posts flaunting his new lifestyle, and the bank notices. I recounted the conversation with Kevin, ending with the 5 words that had become my mantra. "That's your problem now." Abernathy listened without interruption, his fingertips steepled. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "Frank, this is despicable," he said, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. "Your father would be heartbroken. They used your good name and your good nature to commit what looks like a textbook case of fraudulent inducement." He started outlining a defensive strategy, negotiating with the bank, exploring bankruptcy options, mitigating the damage. I held up a hand to stop him. "David," I said, my voice steady, "I didn't come here to play defense. I came here to win." I slid a second, much thicker file across the desk. It was bound in blue and labelled with the name of my LLC, a company my wife and son had never heard of. For the past 15 years, while Sharon complained about my long hours at the plant, I was building something else, a specialty manufacturing business. It's entirely in my name, funded with my own inheritance from my father, which I never mixed with our marital assets. It's now a multi-million-dollar enterprise. They think they bankrupted a salaried factory manager. They have no idea who I am. Abernathy stared at the file, then at me. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. The sympathetic lawyer was gone, replaced by the shark I knew I needed. This wasn't a bankruptcy case anymore. This was a war, and I had just shown him my arsenal. "My God, Frank," he breathed, flipping through the pristine financial statements. "They thought they were robbing the till. They didn't realize they were trying to stick up the entire bank." He closed the file and leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "This changes everything. We're not going to negotiate with the bank. We're going to inform them that they approved a fraudulent loan and that we will be assisting in the prosecution. And we're going to file a civil suit against Kevin to claw back every single dime. They thought they were shearing a sheep. They're about to find out they've been prodding a bear." The first move was a phone call. I sat on a leather chair in Abernathy's office as he put the bank's chief legal counsel on speakerphone. There was no pleading in his voice, no requests for leniency. It was the cold, hard statement of a man holding all the cards. "Your institution has approved a $250,000 commercial loan based on a fraudulent application," Abernathy began, his voice like granite. "The funds were not used for any business purpose. They were used to purchase luxury items, including a vehicle that is currently in my client's son's possession. My client, Mr. Franklin Miller, was fraudulently induced into co-signing. We have all the documentation, and we are prepared to cooperate fully with your fraud division in prosecuting the applicant, Kevin Miller." The lawyer on the other end sputtered, starting with boilerplate threats about Frank's liability. Abernathy cut him off. "My client is the victim here, not the perpetrator. Pursue him, and we will countersue your bank for gross negligence. Work with us, and you might recover some of your money from the person who actually stole it." The line went quiet for a long moment. The message was clear. They could either have a long, expensive fight with a man who had deep pockets and a rock-solid case, or they could go after the easy target, Kevin. The call ended with the bank agreeing to freeze collections against me and open a formal investigation into my son. My next stop was my own bank. With surgical precision, I went through every account I shared with Sharon. I opened a new set of accounts, checking, savings, investment, tied solely to my name and my LLC. I transferred the vast majority of our shared funds, leaving just enough in the joint account to handle the mortgage and utilities for one more month. I cancelled every joint credit card, a quiet act of financial emancipation. They had built their entire lives on my foundation, never bothering to check if that foundation could simply be moved. That's how we got the car. Abernathy informed the bank's fraud department that the single largest purchase made with the loan was a non-business asset, a direct violation of the commercial loan agreement. This gave them the legal right to immediate seizure. All it took was one phone call. And so I sat across the street, watching the first piece of their fraudulent empire get hauled away, feeling not a shred of anger, only the clean, cold satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Later that night, Sharon stormed in, her face a mask of fury. "Kevin's car is gone. The bank took it. You have to call them and fix this right now." I looked up from my newspaper and said calmly, "There's nothing to fix, Sharon. The consequences have started." Sharon stared at me, her mouth hanging open, utterly unable to process my response. "What do you mean, the consequences have started?" she stammered. "Frank, this isn't a game. This is Kevin's life. You will call the bank and you will fix this." I simply picked up my newspaper, turned the page, and said nothing. For the first time in our 25 years of marriage, her demands were hitting a wall of solid steel. Her anger turned to confusion, then to a sputtering, impotent rage. I just let her burn herself out. The man who would have once tripped over himself to soothe her feelings was gone, replaced by a spectator who was finding the show rather dull. The next move came 3 days later. Abernathy had filed the civil suit demanding repayment of the full $250,000, plus interest and legal fees. We made sure the process server found Kevin at the right time. He was hosting a catered brunch at his absurdly expensive apartment for his new wealthy friends. The server, a large, impassive man, walked right into the middle of the party and handed my son the papers in front of everyone. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal document. It was a public declaration. It said, "This man is a fraud who stole from his own father." That evening, they showed up at my house, not asking, but demanding entry. They stormed into my living room, Kevin's face flushed with rage and Sharon streaked with tears. "A lawsuit? Are you insane?" Kevin shouted, throwing the documents on the coffee table. "You're suing your own son. You're trying to ruin me." Sharon chimed in, her voice shaking with theatrical grief. "How could you, Frank? After all I've done to hold this family together, you do this. He's your child." I let them vent, their words washing over me like a storm I was watching from behind soundproof glass. When they finally wound down, I leaned forward. "He's not a child. He's a man who committed fraud. And you," I said, looking directly at Sharon, "were his accomplice." That's when she finally broke. The mask of the caring mother fell away, revealing the bitter, grasping woman underneath. "Accomplice? I was trying to give him the life you never could," she shrieked. "We had a plan. He gets the money, you handle the boring payments in the background, and he gets his start. It's what you're supposed to do. It's your job." I felt a faint smile touch my lips. I subtly tapped the phone sitting on the end table beside me, its screen dark, but its microphone very much active. "Thank you for clarifying that, Sharon. Conspiracy is a much cleaner legal argument." The colour drained from their faces. They finally understood. This wasn't a family squabble, it was a demolition. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could ever be. It was the sound of a world ending. On their faces, I saw the 5 stages of grief compressed into 5 seconds: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, a terrified acceptance. The game was over. I had won. I stood up, the motion feeling deliberate and final. "I believe this conversation is over," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Please leave my house." They stumbled out in a daze, 2 ghosts haunting the ruins of a life they had just learned was never truly theirs. The next morning, I called Abernathy. "She confessed to conspiracy, David. I have it on tape." I could hear the sharp intake of breath on his end. "Well," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice, "that certainly simplifies things. What's our next move?" My answer was simple and immediate. "Draw up the divorce papers, cite irreconcilable differences and financial fraud, have her served this afternoon." Like her son, Sharon was served publicly, right in the middle of a ladies' luncheon at the country club. The whispers that followed were, I'm told, absolutely delicious. The real panic for her set in 2 days later. The joint account was empty. I imagine the scene vividly. Sharon at the checkout of her favourite organic grocery store, her cart piled high, only to have her credit card declined. Then the next one, and the debit card. The life she had taken for granted, the one funded by my sweat and sacrifice, had just been switched off like a light. The texts and voicemails started then, a desperate, pathetic flood. From Kevin, it was threats of telling the whole family how cruel I was. From Sharon, it was a hysterical series of messages oscillating between, "You're destroying our family," and "I have no money for gas, Frank." I read them all, then deleted them without reply. My final move was to reclaim the narrative. I drafted a short, factual email to our entire extended family. I explained that I had filed for divorce and was suing Kevin. I stated the reasons calmly and without emotion. I attached a brief legal summary from Abernathy and, as the final devastating blow, a transcript of Sharon's recorded confession, including the line, "It's your job." I hit send and then turned my phone off for a few hours. When I turned it back on, it was flooded with messages, but not from them. It was from my sister, my cousins, my aunts and uncles. Their messages all said the same thing. "We are so sorry. We had no idea. We stand with you." They were finally, utterly alone. The end came not with a dramatic courtroom battle, but with a quiet, unconditional surrender. Cornered, with no money, no allies, and a mountain of evidence against them, Kevin and Sharon folded. Abernathy negotiated the terms. To avoid a more serious felony conviction, Kevin pled guilty to wire fraud. He received 5 years of probation and a court-ordered judgment to repay the entire $250,000, a financial anchor that would weigh him down for the rest of his life. He was now a convicted felon, his dreams of being a CEO replaced by the grim reality of a criminal record. The divorce was even more brutal for Sharon. In the family court hearing, Abernathy presented the evidence of her conspiracy. The judge was not amused. My business, which I had built long before the loan and with my own separate funds, was ruled entirely my property. The family home, which I had paid for, was to be sold. After the debts she had helped rack up were paid, her share of the equity was laughably small. The woman who had schemed to get a piece of a multi-million-dollar pie was left with barely enough for a security deposit on a small apartment. She had gambled everything on my weakness and lost it all to my strength. 6 months have passed. I sold that big empty house and bought a smaller place on a lake, a quiet testament to a life reclaimed. The other day, I had to drive into the city for a meeting. On my way, I passed a discount furniture store and saw 2 figures out front, struggling to load a cheap particle board dresser into the back of a beat-up sedan. It was Kevin and Sharon. They looked older, worn down by the friction of a life without a cushion. There was no anger or satisfaction in seeing them. It was like watching a documentary about the predictable life cycle of predators who had run out of prey. I didn't slow down, I just kept driving toward my own life. It took losing what I thought was my family to finally find myself. I learned that a person's worth isn't measured by how much they can give, but by the respect they demand in return. They called me a walking ATM, a workhorse, a utility. They were right. My job was to provide, but my final provision wasn't money. It was justice. And for the first time in my life, the person I chose to provide for was myself.